Good evening, everybody. It is my honor to introduce today our speaker, Dr. Patrick Stover. Dr. Stover is the director of the Division of Nutritional Sciences at Cornell, and of course, he is a professor, and I have a privilege of knowing him over the last 2 decades, and our common interest to the role of vitamins in health and disease brought us to the same meetings year over the year, and I'm really at awe regarding the work that he's doing in his lab, and I'm also very amazed how much public work he's doing. He is a member of a number of advisory councils of the World Health Organization. He's on the committees at the National Institutes of Health and National Academy of Sciences. He is a wonderful scientist. He's doing a lot of public work, and instead of talking myself, I would like to let him talk about the nascent problems in nutrition and science and world.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. You have much nicer weather than what I came from. I came from 3 feet of snow that's been there since January, I think. And this week is the first time we've had temperatures above freezing, I think, since Christmas. So we are, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I thank you for the invitation. So what I'm hoping today is we can have more of a conversation. I have slides, and I just want to go through those for reference. But I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I am trained as a biochemist, and I'm interested in how nutrients interact in the body to promote both health and disease. I was actually from Pennsylvania. I was born and raised in Pennsylvania in a town outside Philadelphia. When I grew up, it was all pig farms there, and now it's a suburb of Philadelphia where all the rich baseball players build their mansions. But at that time, my father was, when he was in high school, when he was going to go to University of Pennsylvania for journalism school, and then December 7th happened, his senior year, and it's Pearl Harbor Day. And the next day, like most of his classmates, he went to the recruiting office and joined the Marines. And he did 2 tours in the South Pacific. And when he came back, he got married and started a printing business. We had a family printing business. But my parents, and I guess this was from, and those of you who are old enough to know this, was that concept of the victory gardens, where there weren't a lot of resources going around and people were encouraged to grow their own food. Well, my parents made us, I was one of 8 children, number 7 of 8. We grew everything we ate. We had a couple acres, 3 acres. We all worked in the summer in the gardens, and we had about 3 or 4 big chest freezers in the basement, and we canned and we froze everything we ate. And my parents still, well, my father has passed, but my mother is still 90. I just talked to her the other day. She bought a chainsaw. I asked her why she bought a chainsaw, and she said because a tree fell down, which was a really good answer, but I think at 89 you shouldn't be doing that. But she attributes a lot of her health throughout the years, and she never goes to the doctor because of what she ate. And she's actually very, very distrustful of the food supply, and still has her own garden and grows her own food. But one of the questions I want to ask you is, why do some people live to 110? Genetics. So somebody said genetics. Why? Does everybody agree with that? In part. Why else? What you eat. Exercise activity. What you're exposed to. So which of these are the most important? How would we know that? As somebody who's 110. Well, so if you ask Jeannie Louise, she died in 1997, she lived to 122 and was the oldest fully authenticated human being that ever lived. And she attributed her longevity to olive oil, port, and chocolate. It says, although genes may have contributed to her longevity, as her father lived to the age of 94 and her mother lived to the age of 86. And in fact, we know from studies of twins who have been displaced early, that in fact, genes play a role, but they're not completely deterministic. The most telling predictor of your longevity is the longevity of your parents. But then the question is, how much of that determines your longevity, and in what context, right? And in what context? So genes interact with all of the exposures, right? But does there have to be harmony between genes and those exposures or not? So I showed this. I realized I got old because when I show this photo to students now, they have absolutely no idea who that is. No clue, undergraduates now cannot tell you who that is. At any rate, you see there George Burns smoking a cigar. But from studies of twins, we know that there are three major determinants of your longevity. Your genetics, your genes, and this is why it's really, really, really important to pick your parents well. Really important, one of the most important decisions you make. But your environment as well. And then there's a third arm here, and this is your epigenetics. And having Dr. Zeisel here in town, I'm sure you all know what this is. But can somebody tell me what this is? So you have environmental factors, changes to your genes caused by environment. And what do those changes do? You're right. More specificity. Yes? They turn things on and off. So you all have a genome, right? And you got that from mom and dad. You got genes from mom, you got genes from dad, right? And all the cells in your body have all the exact same DNA, right? But your liver cell doesn't look like your brain cell, doesn't look like all these other cells, and that's because genes, although you have the same genome, which is just a blueprint, right? Genes are turned on and off. And so the liver says, I got to do these functions, and it turns on and off the genes it needs to do the function it has to do. The brain does the same thing, right? But some genes aren't off-on switches. Many are, not all are. Some are like a rheostat. You dial them up, you dial them down. And they dial up and they dial down to match where they are, their environmental exposure. And what has been a real revolution in nutrition, one of them, is understanding this in the concept of stem cells, both embryonic stem cells and adult stem cells. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But this idea of epigenetics or programming. So the genome is the code. That's how you're wired. And epigenetics is how it's read and how it's modified, how it's programmed. But if we look, genetics is primary aging. And again, studies of twins suggest that it really sets the upper threshold. Not completely deterministic, but it can set what your maximum lifespan might be. Whether or not you achieve that or not depends on these other factors. And the good news is that nutrition affects both of these. So while your genetics, I said, is one of the best determinants of how long you'll live, it still only contributes from studies of twins to about 25% of your probability related to longevity. The rest is somewhat under your control. And this is what the big goal in nutrition is to try to understand how these environmental exposures maximize not only longevity. Longevity is nice, but what you really want is healthy aging, right? Now, when we go back to Jeannie Marie, this is not unusual. 10 years ago in Boston, we were organizing a conference on longevity, and we decided to have centenarians there. And they were going to come up at lunch, and they were going to talk about why they live past 100. And we decided it might be a good idea to pre-screen their responses. And it was cigarettes, it was cigars, it was gin, it was vodka, and so we decided to cancel that. But a lot of people attribute their health to food. And that raises the question of, if nutrition can do these things, what is your expectations of the food supply? If we look again between 1900 and 1990, this is leading cause of death in women. You can see in 1990 it was infectious diseases that killed us. Now, these are diseases of aging and diseases that are related to our exposures. Again, indicating that we have the opportunity to control somewhat not only our longevity, but our healthy aging. When you look at these numbers from the American Diabetes Association, this is last year. Look at that, the prevalence of type 2 diabetes, the cost of type 2 diabetes. Who's scared of those numbers? Well, what entity is?
Insurance companies, healthcare.
Well, insurance, and it's a sort of a boom for them, isn't it?
Not to have to pay out for care.
Who pays for it? Who's afraid they're going to have to pay for it? Who worries about those numbers? A lot of food companies are worried about these numbers. If you do more and more surveys now and you ask, who do you blame for obesity? Who do you blame, diabetes on? People say the food companies. And for the first time in a long time, there is a market for healthy food. So we'll just keep that thought and move on. So this is the USDA Secretary of Agriculture. Or this is the Secretary of Agriculture here, head of the USDA, Islak. And when he was appointed, he made at that time, and this is back in 2009, what was viewed to be a revolutionary statement. The USDA must serve eaters as well as farmers. No one had ever said that before. The USDA was viewed as an organization that really looked out for the interest of food producers. And the point that he made was that we have to serve eaters. Why? Why would he make that statement?
Eaters vote.
Eaters vote. Nobody can pay health care costs associated with the food supply. Governments can't afford it. It's bankrupting countries. It's lowering productivity. It's having all of these economic consequences, and nobody knows who's going to pay for this. And a lot of it is related to the food supply. So you hear all sorts of talk now about harmonizing agriculture and healthy food. Or rather, not having an agriculture system where the end result is food, but having an agriculture system that the end result is healthy people. Now, why do we have the agriculture system we have now? What was the primary driver?
Oil debts, after World War II, the Depression.
The Depression. And what was the goal?
To try and keep farmers living and keep food prices regulated somehow. I don't remember.
That's part of it, but what were we trying to eliminate? That there would be no hungry people. The idea was to eliminate hunger. And of course, that sells well. Politicians can love that. Is that a good goal? Is it? What is hunger? No. What's hunger? Nope. What makes you hungry?
Not eating stuff.
Is hunger a disease?
No.
What's a disease related to food?
Malnutrition.
Malnutrition. What's the difference between hunger and malnutrition? Hunger is based on cravings for sugar, calories. If you don't have calories, you get hungry. So what did we do? We engineered a system to produce the cheapest possible calorie you can make. Do it in mass production and eliminate hunger. They did it. What's the consequence of that? Well, the food, because at that time it wasn't understood that there was how important these other nutrients were in terms of health. We were focused on calories and we were focused on hunger, and it was well-intentioned, and it was the right thing to do at that time with the science that we had. But the problem is, science evolved, the food system evolved, and we began to understand there became disharmony between these two because we created cheap calories. No more hunger. Calories were too cheap. Tons of overconsumption. Let me just run to a slide here. It's actually all the way at the end of this deck, but I can bring it up. I don't have control of it here, so I can't run through these too fast. That probably wasn't worth it, but no, there it is. So if you look here from 1960 to 2010, this is the amount of calories the food system generated per capita. There's overweight.
What does that mean, food system generated per capita?
It's how many calories were grown in the United States. So that's how many calories were grown. That's percent overweight. And then this is the number of large-sized portions introduced in restaurants. So if you want to know what causes obesity, that's kind of compelling, isn't it? We created cheap calories. We eliminated hunger. Okay. So what do you expect from the food supply? What do you think you should expect from the food supply? There's all of this interest now in harmonizing the food system for different outcomes other than creating a cheap calorie. So what should it be? What do you expect from the food system? What do you want from your food system? Nutrition. What does that mean?
Vitamins, minerals, healthy.
What does that mean? Eliminate deficiency diseases. That's what any nutritionist would say. So he wants to eliminate nutritional deficiencies. Is everybody happy with that, or does somebody else want something else? Safety. We all want safety, absolutely. And food-borne illness kills more people than just about anything else, right? So we want safe food, and we want food that fulfills our nutritional requirements. What else do we want?
I want farmers to make a living.
We want farmers to make a living. So we want to have a food system where farmers make a living, but people can afford the food, right? We don't want hunger. We said that earlier. We decided that, and we'll stay with that. What else do you want?
Purveyors want shelf life.
Okay, shelf life. That's important in terms of cost. Does anybody here think food has medicinal qualities? Does it? Well, that's different. So what sort of medicinal qualities do you want in your food? For the purpose of? killing free radicals because cancer. Okay, so we want cancer outcomes. Anybody else want anything else? Taste is always good. Not too good, though, because then you eat too much. So who here thinks food has medicinal qualities? That is, if you eat a certain way, this food will have medicinal properties and prevent a disease or manage a disease. You think so? Okay. Anybody disagree with that? Okay, I'm going to tell a little bit of a story here. It's a good story. But first we're going to ask this question. It's going to start with this cover of Nature. I love this cover of Nature. Can science feed the world? In 2050, by 2050, we're going to go from 7 billion people to 9 billion people. And not only do you guys want nobody to be hungry, you want them not to have cancer too. Okay, so now we have all these demands on the food supply. I love this cover, and I love the ambiguity in it. Does anybody see the ambiguity that I saw immediately?
Food made in a test tube.
You have food made in a test tube. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
We don't know yet.
What's in the test tube? Grains. It's those high caloric foods, and what's the other, this little sub-article on diabetes. Cracked me up as soon as I saw that. I don't know if that was done intentionally or not, but I think it's pretty funny. At any rate, can science feed the world? And this is the big question now, right? Because populations are growing. And for the first time, we can engineer the food however we want. We can make these decisions because our geneticists can make GMOs and can make a food with whatever nutrient quantity or quality you want. We can fortify, we can put chemicals in the food supply, we can diversify diets, supplements, we can do whatever we want, but the question is we have to ask, what do we want? What do we expect from the food supply? This is a question not only in agriculture, but it's even a question in nutrition where we're asking about endpoints for requirements. People are saying, well, who cares whether you have adequate amounts of vitamin A, B, or C in your blood? I want a disease endpoint. I want less cancer. I want this. I want a real endpoint that's meaningful, not nutritional status. So the question is, what do you want? And what's achievable? And it's the same thing the general public wants. If you look in 2014, craft food profits down 62%. Nobody wants to buy Velveeta and mac and cheese anymore. You see a number of the food companies are really worried. And what space are they trying to get into? What?
Different organic foods, non-GMO.
So you see the non-GMO, so there's a market for that, and we can talk about whether those are healthy or not. But what's another space they're getting into? Health food, meaning medical foods. Foods like Ensure are making a ton of money. A food product that can guarantee some sort of a health outcome or can make a claim that's scientifically validated. And that's where a lot of the food companies are looking at. Because you look at food, margins are small. That's why farmers don't make very much, right? You go to pharma, huge profits. The food companies are saying, boy, wouldn't I like to be in this space? We can take food and we can make it medicine. We can do a lot better. Our farmers will do better too. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story. But one of the big questions is, what do you want from the food supply? You want to alleviate hunger, malnutrition, prevent disease? But we have a problem. What do you know about medicine? It's expensive. That's one, absolutely. So it's more expensive. Number two, when you watch these commercials, yeah, man, they just roll through these side effects, don't they? Pretty scary. You wonder why anybody take the stuff. If you begin for a medical outcome, maybe you can expect side effects. That there'll be responders and non-responders. For the very best pharmaceutical drug made right now. Still the case is it works in a third of the population, it doesn't work in another third, and another third, you get these horrendous side effects you hear about. Well, shouldn't we expect the same from food? And then do we begin to apply the Hippocratic Oath to food? Do no harm. So let me show you an example of this. Oh, just from this. Jerry Fink was the director of the Whitehead Center at MIT. He was actually a Cornell professor. He did a sabbatic at MIT. And while he was on sabbatic, they made him director. And said, I'm not coming back. So Cornell made him pay back his sabbatic salary because you have to come back for a year. I thought that was pretty lame, but we did that. But anyway, Jerry Fink gave this talk in 1998. And he said, I expect that in the year 2005, when the entire genome is scheduled to be mapped and sequenced, the field of nutrition will be a completely different field. That will be the most revolutionized field in the year 2005. We will be able to know what people can metabolize and what some people can't metabolize. We're going to have a new definition of what it means to be healthy. That was 1998, predicted for 2005. Are we there? Anybody think we're there? No, we're not there. But it's still a lot of potential, and there's still a lot of interest in this, but I love that. And as a matter of fact, the American Society for Nutrition, which is the academic and one of the practice societies for nutrition, released their research priorities last year, published. And number one is understanding the variability in response to diet and food. Somebody give me an example of that? To understand this whole concept of responders and non-responders. Why when some people take medicine, they get better and some people don't? So can you give me an example in food where you have responders, non-responders? Allergies is a big one. What's another one?
Gluten intolerance.
Gluten intolerance. That's a food allergy again. Food and lactose intolerance. Peanuts. That's an allergy. Salt and hypertension. Diabetics. So why are there some responders and some non-responders? Why is this? Why?
Come from different places on the map.
And
Bodies are made to digest different things from their origin.
that's absolutely right. So I'm going to run through this quickly. Just because I love this thing, and then I'll tell this story that I keep promising to tell. But so right now, nutrition, the last 3 people we've hired at Cornell in nutrition have been engineers and computational biologists. Because nutrition more and more is becoming about engineering and a lot of computer science. But what the computer scientists and the evolutionary biologists now are showing is we understand a lot about genes. We have sequenced the human genome. We've sequenced multiple genomes. They can now sequence your genome and they can tell you within a 200-mile radius of where your ancestors came from, most likely. So we understand what the genome was like in Africa. We understand what it was like when populations moved out of Africa. How people changed at the molecular level. And if you look at the process of evolution, how the genome is changed over time, the molecular basis of evolution is changes in DNA sequence. And we can follow that. We can follow that across species. We can follow it within populations. And it turns out that in our genes, there's about 25,000 genes. Not all genes evolve at the same rate. Some of our genes have the exact same sequence almost in bacteria as we have. They haven't changed. You can sequence them across people. You can sequence them in primates. They're exactly the same. Some genes have changed a lot. Not only have they changed a lot over time, but they've changed a lot in subpopulations. What do you think those genes do? What are they affiliated with? What sort of processes? Metabolism is one. Food allergies. Immunity is another. Things that respond to environmental exposures. Those are the genes that are adaptive. It's survival of the fittest, right? So people whose genes who adapted to the environment survived. Those that didn't. But that happened in different parts of the world. So if you look computationally, and this is just the genetics of this, but if you look computationally at genes that have evolved rapidly, they're related to lactose, to ethanol metabolism. Drinking fermented drinks was critical in early evolution because you needed safe sources of liquid. And fermented beverages don't contaminate. Good thing about beer. Iron. If you look at iron, hemochromatosis. People heard of that disease? That was a selective advantage trait. Computational biologists can go through and they can see that it's a rapidly evolving gene. It came out of northern Europe where there's not very much iron in the soil. Those people became really good at sequestering iron from their food sources. But now you change the environment and there's lots of iron, they rust. That's what hemochromatosis is. You take too much iron and you rust and you get cancer. But you can see these signatures of rapid evolution in many diet-related genes. And so the differences in responders and non-responders that we have in current population results back to our history when we adapted to our local food supplies. And that is sort of the molecular basis of why now we have this challenge of responders and non-responders, which we'll get back to here. Responders and non-responders. What's good for you may not be good for me because our genes are different and it's because of our history is different. So if you want food to be the end point, if you want health, if you want disease prevention to be the end point of the food supply, how do you do that in a heterogeneous population when what's good for you may not be good for me? So let me tell you a story related to that. And of course, our differences come not only from our genes, but we understand now that the bacteria that we carry in our guts, this idea of imprinting, biological networks, all of these things contribute to make our response to food unique to us. And the question is now that a lot of the food companies want to know, how many groups can you classify people into? They did it for dog food, and they did it successfully for dog food. Can you do it for people? Classify people considering all of these things to match your food to your health. Okay, so let me just tell you a story here. Neural tube defects. Do you all know about these? So this is an area that I work in. It's an area that Dr. Zeisel works in. But these are rare, common birth defects. So there's about 2,500 affected individuals every year. These are terribly debilitating. If you look in developing countries, 5 to 10 in 1,000. These individuals are paralyzed from the site of the lesion down for the rest of their life. So kids you see in wheelchairs, most likely it's spina bifida. Tricky thing is, too, is that this defect, if it's going to occur, occurs within a month of pregnancy. It happens between day 23 and 28, even before a woman knows she's pregnant. By the time she knows she's pregnant, this defect has either happened or not. And so what happens is, here you see an embryo. Here, this is about day 23. The embryo is being zipped up the back. You grow as 3 germ layers, and then you fold around. This is the head being formed. This is the trunk. The limbs aren't there yet. They'll come here, 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 and here. So over the next 4 days, you're going to get closure of this neural tube. The cells are going to divide, survive, differentiate. They're going to migrate. And if they don't do enough of these things at a sufficient rate, you won't reach closure. You'll have an open pore either in the head or in the trunk. And then during the rest of development, cells will just begin to migrate out of that hole, and you won't get innervation of the legs. If it happens more up near the head, you'll have cognitive deficits. These are common. But there's a wonderful story. This is the best story in nutrition. It never works this well. This is the way it's supposed to work. It actually worked. Where in the 1960s, there were clinical observations that when a mother presented with an affected child, they'd work up her blood, and she would have these blood markers that she didn't have enough of the vitamin folate. Now, there were a lot of other women who had perfectly normal births, and they also could show some of these signs. But if you did have an affected child, you've always showed these signs, virtually always. That led to clinical trials where they took women who intended to become pregnant. They put some on folic acid, some got placebo. These trials had to be stopped early because the women who were getting folic acid had 70% lower rates of the birth defect. So the clinical observation led to these trials that worked, led to the recommendation, boom, before you're pregnant, take this, folic acid. And you have to do it before you're pregnant because by the time you know you're pregnant, it's too late, and most pregnancies are unplanned in this country. But of course, the target audience didn't listen, doesn't really respond to this stuff, right? So this didn't have a great effect. So for a couple, they gave up on these public health campaigns to try to encourage women to take this. I was actually a graduate student when this came out. There were all these sort of innovative ideas of how do you reach the target population, which is women of childbearing age. Those ideas, put it in Coca-Cola. Of course, the nutritionists got all upset, but that's what the target population was drinking. There was somebody actually I know who patented the idea of putting a folic acid pill in women's sanitary products. That's targeting the population, a little crude, but you know, that was a thought. But at any rate, they finally decided to fortify the food supply. That is, they put it in enriched flour. And it worked. Evaluated, if you look everywhere where folic acid has been put in the food supply, birth defect rates have come down remarkably. Never works this way. Huge success. Huge success. If you look here on this map of the world, and I just had, this is a CDC map. I just had a German student yesterday point out to me that East and West Germany are still separated here. But at any rate, dark blue is countries that fortify. What do you notice where there's a lot of white, where they don't fortify? Europe. Russia, Europe. Why?
They're scared of things added to their food.
So there's a cultural issue, and that is Europeans think food is food and medicine is medicine. Thank you very much. What else?
They
What?
don't need it genetically?
What's that?
Do they not need it genetically?
No, their birth defect rates are higher than ours now, much higher. Ireland fortifies. Ireland actually started voluntary fortification. That is, food producers could put it in, and of course that's a nightmare because companies then just started putting it in unregulated, and they were getting unbelievable doses of folic acid because everybody put it in to market it rather than having it regulated through the government at a particular dose. But why don't they want to do it? One of the reasons is this is a very unusual fortification initiative. It's the first time we ever decided to use food as medicine in a public health setting. Typically, when we fortify the food supply, we put in iron, we put in niacin. It's because we do nutrition surveillance. The CDC goes around every year and they draw blood and they measure people's levels of nutrients, and if they see deficiency, they put in the food supply because people were deficient. They didn't have enough circulating vitamins in their blood. That was not the purpose of this. Folic acid was not, there was no folic acid deficiency at the population level. So this was the first fortification initiative that did not seek to remedy a nutritional deficiency, but rather sought a medicinal purpose, to remedy a rare disorder. That is, the target population was those 2,500 births. It's women women of childbearing age who are genetically susceptible to have a child with a birth defect. This is the responder, non-responder. What they don't tell you is that folate deficiency is not a risk factor for birth defects. There are certain women who are genetically predisposed to have a child with a birth defect. They need more folic acid or they're at risk. So we expose everybody for the benefit of this genetic minority that happens to be female and childbearing age. People don't like that, some countries. It exposes everyone, targets a small population, but this raises the question, who benefits, who decides? Who accrues risk? If there's a small group of 25 people, 2,500 who are getting benefit, are there 2,500 people out there who are getting something else? Something else is happening to them. And would you even notice that? Do you know? They did this in 1998. Since 1998, autism rates have gone off the charts. Food allergies have gone off the chart. So every advocacy group says, it's folic acid. See, they did it to us. And so they go through and they do the studies and they disprove these one by one. I will tell you there is no known adverse effect of folic acid on any health outcome. But the question is, would you see it? Because it's only 2,500. One of the big issues in Europe is we don't know how folic acid prevents that birth defect. Steve studies it, I study it. All we know is there was a clinical trial. Women got folic acid, it was prevented. How does it work? We don't know. But we know there's also a relationship between folate and cancer. A lot of cancer drugs mimic folate. They antagonize it. They work against it. There's other examples. See these people? Here's a polymorphism. Polymorphism is a genetic difference. So there's a gene you all carry called methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. You got two copies, one from mom, one from dad. 80% of the alleles in this room have a C at that position of the DNA. It puts an alanine in the protein, and that protein functions as an enzyme and it metabolizes folate. 20% of the alleles in this room carry a T. It has a valine there, and it's a terrible enzyme. If you carry that T, you are at risk of having low folate status, birth defects, and miscarriage. If you're an embryo, not a good thing. You need more folate. But if you survive, look at your colon cancer risk. Every study, this is the Physician's Health study, down 70 to 80%. If you have the normal allele here, the C, that's your risk. You carry a T, risk of birth defects, your cancer rate is way down. This worries people, that there's this connection between birth defects and cancer. Now, this doesn't mean that folic acid causes cancer, but you see these relationships. And oncologists are absolutely convinced, some of them, that this is having an adverse effect on cancer. And you can't do the study. We can't give people folate and look for cancer. That's not ethical, right? But what we can do is do clinical trials. Oh, the other interesting thing about this TT, so this is one of the genetic risk factors for the birth defect. Look at Africans, 0. What does that tell you? This was a mutation that happened after the migration out of Africa. And you can actually follow it, where it emerged, and then how it spread around the globe. So Africans don't gain any benefit in terms of folic acid in this particular polymorphism. They're not carriers. So you get into ethnic differences and all sorts of things when you start medicalizing the food supply. So this is not the only gene that causes birth defects. And yes, places in Africa do. We don't know what neural tube defect rates are in Africa, actually, because it's really hard. A lot of issues over ascertainment and all of these issues. But for that particular allele, it's not a problem for them. Okay, So why aren't countries fortifying? And again, there's this idea the oncologists have, is that if you're folate deficient, you are at risk for having a normal cell become a cancer cell. And that's true. We know that from people who are folate deficient. We know it from animals. But there's this theory, so that's known risk. If you're folate deficient, increased risk of cancer. But the idea is if you get more folate, once you have a tumor, you're going to accelerate it. But we don't have evidence for that. But what did we do? We did clinical trials. We did clinical trials where we put people on folic acid, and we look for risk of colon cancer. This, in terms of public health, doesn't get any better. 50,000 individuals received a folic acid supplement that was 10 times what you get from fortification. They got it for 5 years. They looked at these were the trials. This plot here, if that box and the little wings touch that bar, it means the effect is 0. They looked at every cancer, no effect. 5 years, 10 times what you get in fortification, no cancer. Are some of the oncologists convinced? Is Europe convinced? No. Why? What are the arguments? And they make, these arguments are made to this day against fortification. Why isn't that convincing to them? You gave 50,000 people 10 times the amount of folate you get from fortification for 5 years, no increase in any cancers.
Only 50,000, there's only 2,500 for the benefit. That's still a smaller population.
So that's one of the arguments, is that cancer, birth defects are easy to ascertain. You have a normal birth, you have an affected birth, you can count them. If you had an increase of 2,500 cancers on the background of all the cancer we have, it's noise. It's noise. You'd never see it. So that's one argument, is that it just could be infrequent. Just like neural tube defects are infrequent, you can't pick it up in the noise. That's one argument. The other argument is 5 years, we're worried about 50 years of exposure. It takes 50 years to get some cancer. Do that experiment for 50 years, and then I'll be more convinced. Right? So this is where we are when we medicalize the food supply. And actually, if you look here, they actually looked at annual mortality from colon cancer. And you can see from 1950 to 2010, as we have increased the quality of the food system, including fortification, that's what's been happening to colon cancer rates. So nutrition does matter. But at any rate, so they make these arguments that, well, we're not out of the woods, because we're never going to know, and you can't do the experiments. They're not ethical to do on people. And animal studies aren't evidence. A lot of things you can show in an animal, and it's mixed in animals. In people, you can't make that correlation. People's physiology is different. So one of the questions we asked in public health, we do risk management, right? What's an example of that? What's been in the news under fire about a public health approach recently? That's a risk management issue. Immunization, right? When we immunize, do we know that some people are going to be in trouble? We know that there's going to be a small percentage, but we do it for the good of the whole. It's a risk management. We do the cost-benefit analysis, and we say we're going to do this, and if you don't do it, you're a bad person, and that's who you are. What do physicians say? Like Steve here. They have the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. So when you medicalize the food supply, you come up with a clash between a risk management approach where you admit there's going to be winners and losers. We're heterogeneous. We all respond differently to these exposures, right? But we're going to measure things so that we get the best outcome at the population level, recognizing there may be winners and losers. Whereas clinicians say, do no harm, which sometimes is translated actually in policy as take no risk. And that's where Europe is. So right now, The National Toxicology Program is trying to look at this concept right now related to folic acid, and how do you develop a research agenda around this to try to identify what the risks may be and identify them. But this is where food is going. We're trying to have medical outcomes for food. This is going to be repeated for all sorts of food products, for all sorts of nutrients. Let me tell you a little bit. So that was genetics. A little bit about epigenetics. How much time do we have? Am I over? Do we have? Okay. So we have our genes, and those genes give us these responding, non-responding type characteristics to food, right? But the third leg of that triangle was epigenetics. And so this is our genes. And again, we talked about how all the cells in our body have the same DNA, but we turn genes on and off, right? And food plays a role in that. Nutrients do. So you tag your DNA with these little chemicals, methyl groups, acetyl groups, different types of chemical signals that determine how much of a gene is turned on or turned off. Okay, so if you eat a lot of one thing, you need to metabolize more. You can go and adjust your little program, and you can increase the machinery you need to deal with that exposure. And this is what adult stem cells do, is they read the environment, they tweak the genome to deal with that environmental exposure. But one of the advents in stem cells, and stem cells are both embryonic stem cells and adult stem cells, they're different. They are constantly sensing the environment and adjusting their networks, rewiring, sensing, adjusting, sensing, adjusting. And so they're much more fluid in terms of how their genome can be programmed. It doesn't saturate as much. But when they differentiate, I'm a stem cell. I can become any type of cell, and I decide to become a blood cell or a liver cell. I lock in that circuitry at a certain set point. And that's what's known as genome programming, and something that happens with stem cells. And an example of this was a famous mouse model that came out of Australia, Emma Whitehead. But see these mice? Has anybody seen this before, this famous little study? These mice are genetically identical. They are as genetically identical as identical twins are, even more so. They're an inbred strain of mouse. And what do you notice that's different about them? Coat color is one. Size. So this guy is yellow and fat. That guy's black and lean. The only difference among those mice is the amount of folate and B vitamins the mother had during gestation. That's the only difference. So they all had different mothers. They're all genetically identical. And this is a weird strain of mice. About 30% of your genome is viruses that have jumped in throughout human history. So you've got all these viruses in your DNA, and your body turns them off with these methyl groups. The way it turns genes on and off, it turns the methyl groups on. Well, once in a while, and it's 1 in every 300 births in humans, one of these will jump in front of a gene. And when it does, the body goes to silence it, but when it does, it affects the expression of that gene, how much of it is made to make protein, right? So this is a weird mouse strain where a virus jumped in front of the agouti gene. The agouti gene controls both coat color and appetite. So how much folate the mother ate affected how much of these methyl groups that went on, affected how much agouti gene was made, that affected for the lifetime of the animal its appetite and its coat color. Because the exposure was just during early gestation. But then those embryonic stem cells differentiated, and they memorized how many methyl groups they had, which related to how much folate and B12 and choline the mother had. It's actually choline, turns out to be the most important thing here. Programmed it with lifelong consequences. So it's not what you eat, it's what your mother ate that becomes important. And this is a way that epigenetics can trump genetics in terms of your longevity, in terms of your ability to deal with environmental exposures. To the next generation, it begins to wash out, but yes, partially, but it gets washed out. So there's now all of this work going on looking at transgenerational inheritance of obesity from both the male germline and the female germline, of metabolism, these sorts of things that aren't related to genetics, but related to this programming. So the idea here, and this was originally called the Barker hypothesis, is that these early nutritional experiences program the genome to give you a risk phenotype that can lead to disease. This was a hypothesis that goes back to the 80s. With stem cells, we know it's about sensing, adapting, locking in these networks. Do you see why now this is becoming engineering? It's becoming network engineering. There was another study that was done, and I should say that Dr. Zeisel has done very similar studies, but I don't go out on the road and promote his work. I promote my people's work. But she did a clinical trial where she took pregnant women and gave them choline. This is where you find choline. Choline is one of these nutrients that programs the genome. It puts methyl groups on and determines how much you make. So she took women and gave them either what the Institute of Medicine recommends in terms of levels for choline, and another group got 2 times that amount because she felt that that recommended level was too low. And it turns out that cortisol was lower in these children, and it appears to have been programmed. Cortisol is your flight or fight response. It's your stress hormone. Stress is one of the things that makes you age and kills you. You don't want high cortisol. But everybody has a basal rate, and then when you get stressed, it goes up. But that basal rate becomes really important. Those that had the higher levels of choline had lower cortisol. And you can see it here. This is the difference between the 2 groups, babies born to the 2 groups. And cortisol, again, high cortisol is a risk factor for these. Low cortisol improves memory, attention, learning. So maternal diet can play a really key role in programming the genome. Works in mice, works in humans. Another example, this is Barb Strutt, who is one of our faculty members, was studying the Down syndrome mouse. So in Down syndrome, you have an extra chromosome, a trisomy. And they made a mouse that had Down syndrome to begin to try to look at how you can treat Down syndrome. And she took moms and put them on choline very early during gestation, these higher levels. And the pups born to the mom who had choline had enhanced performance in the 5 visual attention tasks that the Down syndrome mice don't do well in, similar to what you see in humans, and diminished heightened reactivity to committing errors, which you find in Down syndrome. In fact, they were almost normal, and some of those tests were the same as the wild-type mice. This was published a couple years ago. We get emails all the time now from moms who find out they're carrying a Down's child. They go on choline, and their children are meeting milestones that normal kids meet. Now, this is all anecdotal. This isn't a scientific study. But you can see the power that nutrients can have in affecting function. What about adult stem cells? Well, this is what a lot of the medical food companies are interested in now. If it works for fetal cells, can we target our neural precursors in our brain? There's a theory out there, which may be right, that a lot of diseases of neurodegeneration, as you age, are like the menopause of the brain. You run out of stem cells, or you run out of healthy stem cells, or they're not programmed right. And they want to make nutritional products to keep a healthy number of stem cells so that your organs age without deterioration. And there's a lot of evidence that this can be done. You don't want to target the tissue that's already degenerating. You want to target those stem cells that are going to regenerate that organ. So there's a huge amount of work being done both in academia, but especially in the private sector, trying to understand nutrition and adult stem cells, quality and quantity. And from works that's been done in Drosophila and model flies, nutrition has a huge effect on modifying your stem cells and keeping them healthy. And that's just showing here, every tissue you have has these stem cells that sit there and they don't divide until they have to regenerate, until some cells die. And one of the keys to longevity is keeping these stem cells healthy and keeping a sufficient number of them. So I'll leave this just for questions. That's what I left a few hours ago. But one of the biggest challenges we find in nutrition, again, is we now have the ability to engineer the food system in ways we haven't been able to before. With the human genome, we can see how we can use food to program. But what do you want from the food supply? And if you want medicinal outcomes, it can be achieved, but can you do it at the population level? Or you have to begin looking at the individual. If you begin looking at the individual, can you afford that? Are you willing to pay more for your food? So it's very interesting times, lots of opportunity we've never had before to understand this connection between food and health. But it's going to be complicated, and it's going to require, again, a paradigm shift of how we think of public health and how we bring in more engineering, both in terms of reverse engineering the food supply, the ag engineers, depending on what we want, but then also engineering our systems and understanding what types of food at what times and what do we want to target, which type of cells, what stem cells. So it's an exciting time, but I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you very much. Yes?
Going back to the centenarians, what do you think the chances are that they're right when they say, George Burns, should smoke a cigar, and, and the person who says, well, it's, some other delicacy, that they're actually right?
Well, again, they could be right. In other words, for some people, it's about responders, non-responders. Some people have really robust antioxidant systems. So they can take exposures like cigars and not have the same reaction that somebody else who can handle that very well. So that can be a responder, non-responder. You go to the alcohol lowers stress, so that probably has an effect on everybody, and some of us are better than dealing with alcohol than others. But alcohol is, the dietary guidelines recommend, men over 40 have a drink or two a day, women a drink. Sorry, women.
How about grape juice instead of alcohol, since alcohol is such a toxin?
Well, it's all about dose. So alcohol isn't really a toxin. It depends on dose. Okay, so alcohol lowers cortisol. Grape juice won't. Grape juice has sugar. It doesn't have ethanol. So again, you don't need alcohol to lower your stress. There's other ways of doing it. But there have been health benefits shown with taking alcohol, but there's many ways of lowering your alcohol. There are other than bioactive food components in wine, in grape juice, like resveratrol, that have these programming effects, yes, that have these health promoting effects. There's a big question about dose and how much you have to take to get these effects and so forth and so on. But each individual dietary component can have a unique effect. Alcohol is one effect. These bioactives have another effect, right? And understanding how much, when, what combinations, is what becomes important.
How far are we away from analyzing individuals and determining what they need? I mean, we do that to some degree now, but.
So one of the biggest things right now, and again, we have a number of faculty who have gotten funded on this, is they have this for Ebola now too, I just saw. You talk into this, Or you put a little sensor on the back of this, prick yourself. It can tell you a lot about your nutritional profile. It can tell you about potential cancer markers you may have. There's people using cell phone technology that monitor your breath and can tell you whether you have diabetes. These are all in development, but there is a huge market for personalized monitoring, which people want to do. Some people think this is obsessive compulsive, but people like to, I do it. I have an app for how much I run and how fast I run, and I'm always comparing this and this and that. But you're going to be able to measure everything. And then it's going to track with the GIS, and so the government's going to know who's deficient, who's not deficient, or who gets insurance and who doesn't, and this and that.
I think in the genetics piece of it, our catalog of which gene variants do what is probably in the 100, 200. And when it gets to about 5,000, 10,000, you could probably start to make some recommendations to people about what their genes make them fast metabolizers or slow metabolizers. But it's probably 5 years away before we have a catalog that size. And also, right now we deal with it sort of one spelling difference at a time, when really it's probably groupings of differences that add up to change in metabolism, not a single one. And our ability to deal with those groupings is still primitive. Again, by 5 years from now, I'd expect we'll be pretty good.
But these cell phone technologies are just going to be huge. Personal health monitoring, we're going to put the MDs out of business.
I just wanted to weigh in on the responder, non-responder related to alcohol and tobacco. We can't really argue that those products promote health, can we? But rather that they just don't detract in some as much as they do in others.
The scientific evidence is that smoking is not good for anybody.
Right. So I think it
But alcohol's not true. There is a health benefit with having a drink a day. I mean, that's just the data. There is a health benefit with that.
I wonder if you could weigh in on the data related to grains in particular.
So my mother buys this. She has right now, she's horrified at this. She bought a strawberry that's as big as her fist, and she put it on her windowsill. And it's been there a year, and it still looks the same. She's terribly upset about this. And she's convinced that, that the government is giving her this thing. What's that?
You sure it wasn't a plastic strawberry?
No, it's a real strawberry. I poked at it a little bit. So the question of GMOs. How many people are against GMOs? Who thinks GMOs? Why?
I just think there's not enough known about them, and it's not nature's way. And I know that pollination is a natural GMO, but we need cross-species, genetic species, and I don't think that could be healthy.
And so this, there is, I can give you my view of this. And when Monsanto came out with the first GMOs, they poisoned the well because they made it about insecticide resistance. And there's special seeds that were sterile, so people just had to buy their seeds. And it was such a poor rollout that was exclusively focused on profit. If you want to feed 9 billion people, you need to engineer plants that can grow in high salt, that can grow in low water. You need to be able to engineer salmon, which they've done, which can have more flesh, that can grow in different types of water. A priori for most GMOs, and you have to be careful because, what you've done in a GMO is you're trying to you're changing the characteristics of the plant. Okay? Of course, this happens over eons, that's plants change, but you're engineering a change for a specific purpose. What you worry about is unintended consequences. Do we know what they are? Absolutely not. But there's no reason to believe that you couldn't study them, validate their composition. We can do that now. They do that really well here at the Murdoch Institute. They can measure everything in any type of food and give you that profile. And you can then even do trials, safety trials on these. But people who are food economists, when they look at 2015, and they look at the amount of protein we're going to need, and look at this, this, and that, we're going to need all the tools in our toolbox. And we have to do it carefully, but I think we have to be pragmatic about it. And I think that the sort of negative knee-jerk reaction that some people have, I think is absolutely essential to make sure that we get it right. Because you do have to get it right, and you do need to do the good science. But the food system economists I know tell me that we're going to need not only these engineering techniques, and there's all different ways to do it now. We don't have to put foreign genes in anymore. We can just go in and change genes that are actually there. Same effect. People make a big deal out of this. Genetically, it's the same thing. But we aren't going to be able to produce the quality and the quantity of food in different parts of the world without these sort of technologies. I mean, that's, and so you end up, do you want starving kids? Do you want malnourished kids? Do you want GMOs? I mean, eventually you're going to have to begin to make these sorts of decisions.
I think another way of saying that is that there's nothing we do in medicine or science that doesn't have a risk and a benefit. And the question is the benefit big enough to take the risk? And when we're running out of water in California, if you could make a crop that'll grow on half the water, you might be able to feed people when they're not being fed. And the tragedy is it's seen as black and white. So Zaire had a famine about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, and we shipped them GMO corn to feed people with, not to seed. And they refused to feed people with it because it was GMO and might cause some long-term problem while 2 million people starved to death. So I think it's a risk and a benefit to starve to death versus maybe a long-term risk of having some problem. We're going to have to take some risks. And we may regret some of those risks later on, but the benefit has to be big enough that it's worth it. And the problem initially was the benefit was the farmer could grow with a little less
Pesticide.
Or a pesticide or a weed killer that would work better. But eventually, if, for instance, there's a rice that has more vitamin A in it, and for an area of the world where people are going blind from too little vitamin A, having them be able to grow that crop would be helpful. So somebody's got to be getting in and saying, where do we take the risk? And how big a risk are we willing to take? How big is the benefit of the problem that we're going to do?
Absolutely.
You were talking about the genetic programming and how it leads to propensity for obesity or diabetes and things of that sort. How does that play into counseling or treating people? I'm a health coach, and as far as if you're taking that into a factor, it doesn't mean that it's, there's no hope, but at the same time, I'm sure you still promote a healthy lifestyle.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
what is their likelihood of true success or, overcoming their goals that they may really want?
So, I mean, let me put that in a broader context, and that is, when it comes to let me start with this. We have a speaker coming in 2 weeks who was involved in all of the clinical trials at Merck for the past 30 years for weight loss pills, appetite suppressants, this and that. Virtually all of them failed miserably because they could make a pill that would suppress appetite and people became suicidal. They became depressed. Your mood, your motivation, and your food all use the same networks and pathways and are tightly linked. Okay? And they're programmed. These pathways are programmed gestationally. They're one of those pathways that's easily programmed. So not all of us feel hunger the same. Not all of us have that same interaction with food. And this is why, at least I was always raised on personal responsibility and this and that. That doesn't work very well. Because for some people it's easy, for some people that's their burden. And I think you have to recognize that, and they have to work much harder to achieve the same health goal that someone else may achieve easier. I think that's the bottom line, that people have to be educated about that our physiology is not the same, and you know, it's not that somebody's lazy or somebody's not strong-willed or this or that. They're working, they have to climb a much steeper hill to get to that point, and it may not even be possible. That's one point. The other thing, again, you're getting to this idea of personal responsibility. And this was another part of the talk I didn't have, and I have a little slide or a thing from Prince Charles. But there's a big movement called true costing. And it directly relates to this. And do you know what true costing is? So when there was just an Academy report, hidden cost. So if you talk on Capitol Hill, okay, you'll get a lot, well, this, you know, obesity, food, this and that, that's about, government shouldn't be in that. That's all about individual decisions, right? I make a decision, I can choose whether or not I want to be healthy or not. I can choose what I eat, don't mess with my donut, right? The problem with that is the hidden cost. So we do not build into food the healthcare consequences of what you eat or the environmental costs. And some foods have a big environmental footprint in terms of what they do to soil erosion, quality of water, quality of air, than other foods. And what the economists are telling us, if you want to cure metabolic disease, true cost it. Make that, build in the cost of diabetes, this healthcare that's socialized. So healthcare costs are socialized right now. So you can't say on the one point, I'm about personal responsibility, and if people can do what they want with food, yet socialize the healthcare cost. So and Prince Charles is actually one of the big proponents of this. That is, in public health, don't socialize the cost. Make people pay for the whole package. You get the donut, you get the cheap donut, but you got to pay the consequences for that. But it relates to the same thing about how do you view food and personal responsibility, both at the level of how you have to adjust your lifestyle and what you're capable of doing or not, but also when you choose to make decisions related to your food, do you socialize the negative aspects of that or not?
What's causing the obesity epidemic?
There's a lot of things, but this is, it's that graph I showed right there. This is calories in the food supply. Weight gain.
Then why do we need to grow more food?
You need to grow better food. Problem is there's too many calories in the food supply. This is plate size. This is weight. That's calories in the food supply, normalized to persons, number of people. So we used to produce this many calories per people. Now we do this many calories per people.
This is per U.S.
This is U.S.
Right, so per the world.
Per the world, it's not true. Yeah, but this is in the U.S. But if you want to know what causes obesity, there's a lot of causes. But the laws of thermodynamics still hold. As you take in energy, you either burn it or you store it, or you make heat. And so that's the fundamental problem with obesity. And again, it's accessibility to food. You can go to the hardware store and there's food. You can go to the laundromat and there's food. There's just food all over, right? And so if you are somebody who, because of your genetics and your epigenetics, is hungry all the time, you're exposed to an environment where you're going to eat more, right? Whereas if it's not there, you're not going to eat it, or it's going to be harder for you to get it. We've just made it really easy to put on weight. And so people who have a higher appetite, people who are more susceptible to weight gain, this is hog heaven for them, right?
Why is it that the food companies that put corn syrup and things like chocolate milk,
Because it's cheap.
and that's putting us close?
Yep. This is why people want a true cost. It's capitalism. It's capitalism. Well, that's okay. And so there are people who argue that food companies shouldn't be allowed on the stock market. Because if you're on the stock market, it's all about quarterly earnings. Well, food shouldn't keep growing, right? People should be eating the same, so there shouldn't be growth in the food industry. So by having it on the stock market, you're sort of working against the whole public health thing. But I'm not an economist.
What do you think about the theory that people eat more when they aren't getting the nutrition that their bodies need, but they don't recognize it as a lack of nutrition, so they continue to consume calories?
So again, it goes to what is hunger. And people talk about silent hunger, which is the lack of vitamins. So vitamins, I don't know of one vitamin or mineral that actually gives you a physiological response to make you want to eat. There isn't one. It's all calories. So calories are the only thing when you're low on, and protein, that make you want to eat. And you get calories from protein, but that's what drives your hunger.
Oh, in iron deficiency, people get cravings to eat
Dirt, yeah.
So they're trying to get.
They're trying to get iron. So that is another one, yes. Pica. Yes.
Do you believe, or are you hopeful that eventually the big agricultural companies and our elected officials that are kind of open door with the USDA and the FDA will believe the research that you're doing, and they will have to finally listen to the science? Do you think there will be a tipping point where they won't be able to deny it because their profits will be so effective?
What I can tell you is that most of the people I know in food companies that I talk to and I work with, it's economics that drives everything at the end of the day, and that's why the economists are pushing true costing. Healthcare costs are going to force the change. That's what's going to force the change.
But what forces, I think, the food companies is the consumer saying, I'm willing to pay a little more to have healthier food. Because though people say that, when you test it, it isn't true. So when people put calcium in orange juice, people will buy it if it costs the same and prefer the one with calcium. If it costs 2 cents more, they'll buy the cheaper one. People have to just become convinced they want.
But that's changing. So if you look at surveys, that is changing. The other thing you'll see, which I have a slide on here somewhere, is that local communities are doing soda tax, this and that. When Bloomberg put the soda size thing in, and he was Mr. Nanny Nation, he's not a dumb guy. So this was a goofy idea, right, saying no big sodas. What he's trying to do, he was working for the people to push true costing. So if you have what worries the food companies the most, and again, food companies are just creatures of the system, like we all are, okay? But what food companies are worried about, and some of them are even saying tax us, regulate us, because what they don't want is New York City regulating soda size, New Jersey taxing soda, somebody banning trans fat. Then they don't have a market they can move in because local communities are setting their own regulations, and they can't make a different product. And so they're saying, okay, please just regulate it, tell us what the rules of the games are, especially the big ones because they can adjust. So that's what some people think is going to drive. It's true costing is going to drive it, and it's the food companies that are going to ask for it if local governments keep setting their own standards and taxes and approaches that close markets or restrict markets.